Imagine this, 1989, you're in a bank branch. A customer walks up to the counter and says, "Transfer this money to that account." The teller looks at the screen, fingers sliding across the keyboard, a few keystrokes, and the transaction goes through. And you, almost without thinking, ask, "Where's the internet?" Answer, there isn't any. No Wi-Fi, no link to log into the server, no browser. But the bank is running. Card transactions are happening, the ATM is dispensing cash, international transfers are moving. It's like there's an invisible nervous system, and the bank is breathing through it. Today, that's what we're talking about, the private networks that ran banks. Before TCP/IP took over everything. They weren't famous, they weren't advertised, but for years, they carried the world's money. And the most interesting part is that those networks were sometimes stronger than the internet, because for a bank, the first rule is not speed, accuracy. What did online banking mean before the internet? Today, when we say online, we immediately think of the internet, web, mobile apps, APIs. But banks were online even before the internet. Their online world was just more closed, more disciplined. Back then, banks' priorities looked like this. Reliability, if the system goes down once, hundreds of transactions can be left unfinished. Stable latency, not 1 second sometimes and 20 seconds other times, the same rhythm every time. Security, know exactly who is connecting and from where. Audit trails, everything must be verifiable afterward. The internet back then was more like an open sea. Banks don't like money swimming in open seas, so they built different roads for themselves. Private lines, private protocols, private rules. In a way, a bank network was like a private club. If you're not a member, you don't get in. Leased lines, the bank's private tunnel. Our first hero, the leased line, a rented, always-on connection. Picture it like this. There's a headquarters, there are branches, but between them, there isn't a road everyone uses. There's a private tunnel belonging to the bank. Only the bank's data flows through it. Why was this attractive for a bank? No sharing. It doesn't mix with other companies' traffic. Predictability, speed, and latency are more stable. Control. The owner of the line, service rules, technical procedures, everything is defined. Yes, it was expensive, but for a bank, there's a word even more important than expensive, guarantee. And here's a detail. A bank transaction looks like a message, but that message can be someone's salary, a company's payment, a country's trade operation. For a bank, the phrase, "a packet got lost," is almost equal to "a crisis has started." Now the giant of that era enters the stage. The IBM empire, SNA, and terminal culture. Many banks worked for years with IBM mainframes. Mainframe, meaning a big, powerful brain in the center. Branches were the endpoints connected to it. This world's network language was often SNA, Systems Network Architecture. And SNA's philosophy beat in the same rhythm as banking itself. There is a center, there is hierarchy, there are rules, there is permission. And now, one of the most interesting artifacts of that era, the 3270 terminals. Sometimes they were called dumb terminals, meaning not smart, because they didn't compute anything by themselves. They simply displayed the screen coming from the center and sent your keystrokes back to the center. This was ideal for a bank because sensitive data stayed in the center. The device in the branch was just a window. Even if it was stolen, there was no treasure inside. Management and auditing were easier. In short, the bank's brain was in the center and the branches were just nerve endings. X25, the bank's old internet, but stricter. Now we come to a very interesting name, X25. If the internet is free traffic, X25 is more like a ticketed passenger. A connection is established, a virtual circuit is created, and the data travels along that circuit. Why did X25 work for banks? Because in the X25 world, the network itself checks errors, controls delivery, demands order and sequence. People sometimes describe X25 like this: not very fast, but very responsible. And banks needed responsibility. Because in banking, it's not maybe it arrived. It has to be it arrived for sure. Financial messages moved with so much discipline on these networks that even today, in the internet era, that discipline can feel nostalgic in some places. Everything was simple, rules were strict, surprises were rare. Swift, the global language of banks and global discipline. Now imagine, Two countries, two banks, two different systems. One has different software, the other has different procedures, different operating rules. How do they talk? Answer, SWIFT. A lot of people see SWIFT as just transfers, but for banks, SWIFT is bigger than that. A common language plus a common format plus a common discipline. SWIFT's power is that when banks send a message, they agree on things like, this field is the sender's information. This field is the recipient's account. This code describes the transaction type. This structure is the standard. It's not, I wrote it this way, you figure it out. It's a culture of, we all build the same sentence. And this is one reason banks didn't rush to the internet. They had already built systems that enabled global connection. They just weren't for everyone. And now, let's move to the most familiar part. You insert your card. The screen says processing, a 3-5 second pause. Then cash comes out. You just take the money and leave. But inside those 3-5 seconds, a very serious script is running in the background. A request is created. Card data is checked. Balance is queried. Risk rules run. Is it suspicious? Is the limit exceeded? A response is prepared. The response comes back. Back then, these systems were often built not on the public internet infrastructure, but on private corporate networks. Because an ATM doesn't have the right to say the internet is weak today, the ATM's job description is one sentence. Work. Card networks had the same strict demands. Latency had to be stable, responses had to arrive in sequence, errors had to be handled. In banking, work sometimes doesn't count as working. So how did TCP/IP come and round everyone up? Here's the most delicious question. With such strong, closed, reliable networks, how did TCP/IP swallow everything? 4 reasons. Price and scale. Private networks were expensive. As the TCP/IP world grew, hardware got cheaper, vendors increased, competition rose. The same technology everywhere became possible. Standardization. When one protocol spreads widely, companies don't want to maintain 10 different languages. For IT teams, it's easier too. One ecosystem, one knowledge base. Security maturing. In the early days of the internet, banks' concerns were justified, but over time, encryption got stronger. VPN stabilized. Security practices hardened. Monitoring and logging improved. So the internet gradually moved closer to a form banks could love. Banking itself changed shape. The shift from branch-centered banking to mobile and online banking began. APIs, integrations, third-party services, the natural language of all of that was TCP/IP. And in the end, banks said, all right, this time you win. The legacy of old networks, still in banks' blood. Here's the best twist of the story. Banks moved to TCP/IP, but they didn't lose the philosophy of the old networks. Even today, there's a voice in a bank's head. Let it be stable. Let it be traceable. Leave an audit trail. Let it be secure. Let nothing happen without permission. The internet gave banks speed, but bank networks taught the internet one lesson. Not every packet is just data. Sometimes it's money itself. The invisible heroes? So yes, TCP/IP really did take everything. Today, bank servers, cloud systems, mobile apps, APIs, all live in this world. But once upon a time, even without the internet, there were networks that kept banks running. Leased lines, IBM SNA and 3270 terminals, SWIFT's disciplined messaging standards, the private infrastructure of card and ATM networks. And now, the next time you tap your card and hear that familiar click, stop for a second and think. Behind that click, there was once a world built before the internet, silent, disciplined, and extremely serious. Because the internet gave banks speed. But banks taught the internet one thing. Trust is more important than any protocol. Do you think banks today can fully trust the open internet for the most critical operations? Or will the old closed network logic, private lines, strict control, always remain one step safer?